Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in a second. Just letting people in. Welcome, welcome. And you're welcome to start using the chat, letting people know where you're coming from. Introduce yourself through the chat. We should have a pretty good crowd today for this webinar. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, my name's Oryx Cohen. I'll be the moderator for this webinar, which is a part of our Compassionate Approaches to Crisis webinar series. And this webinar is entitled, Do You Hear What I Hear? The presenters are Kenneth Cozy Arrington, Tom Clute, and Kate Hill. And I will be introducing them in a moment. But first, let's do some housekeeping. So this webinar was developed in part under grant number, you can see it there, from SAMHSA, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Center for Mental Health Services, SAMHSA, or HHS. So yes, a common question. The answer is yes. This webinar is being recorded, and this recording will be posted to our website, www.powertoyou.org. Closed captioning is available. You can click on the CC or more to view closed captioning. You can also view the entire transcript of the meeting by clicking on Show Transcript. Questions. If you have questions at the end of the webinar, there will be a Q&A session. So you are invited to ask questions at any time through the chat function. We will do our best to answer all questions. If we do not answer your question, you're welcome to email us at info@powertoyou.org, and we will do our best to get back to you. You're also welcome to make comments using the chat function. We want to make this as interactive as possible in a webinar format. So make good use of the chat. I know we have a lot of friends here, colleagues, so we want this to be as interactive as possible. All right, so let's get to our presenters. Presenting today, we'll have Kenneth Cozy Arrington, who is an educator, activist, and advocate for folks living with HIV/AIDS, hoarding issues, and mental health challenges. An employee of Peers, envisioning and engaging in recovery services in Oakland, California, Kenneth facilitates weekly rap groups, buried in treasure support groups, and special messages groups. I love that name. For people who may have experienced or are experiencing psychosis. Cozy is a Bay Area Hearing Voices Network board member and a facilitator of a weekly evening group. Welcome, Cozy. Tom Clute had an experience in his early 30s. Tom is a veteran, a poet, a writer, and a speaker. Tom is creative and loves ideas, connections, and healing. Because of his profound healing, Tom is honored and inspired to pass along his voyage of understanding and is grateful to be presenting in this webinar. And our first speaker of the day, my friend, Kate Hill. We've known each other a long time. We started doing Hearing Voices trainings together many years ago. So very happy to have Kate Hill, who identifies as a voice hearer whose experiences tend to be spiritual in nature. She has been the director of Portland Hearing Voices since 2013 and a member of the Hearing Voices Network since 2009. Kate enjoys affirming research about extreme and altered states from cross-cultural and spiritual perspectives. With a foundation in peer support, She studies and practices healing modalities outside of the mental health industry, such as hypnosis and process work. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Kate for your presentation. So I will stop my share.
All right, and I will start my share. Hi, everybody. Let's see. Just gonna take a second. All right, here we go. There we go. Okay, hi everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I just want to remind everybody to please take care of yourself. Sometimes in, trainings and whatnot for hearing voices material, there can be some things that make us feel a little uncomfortable, and that's perfectly fine. Make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Drink water, take a snack. Eat a snack, step away if you need to. The point is to care for yourself. I'm going to be talking about myself and my personal experiences a little bit, and then I'm going to go into the history of the Hearing Voices movement and Hearing Voices philosophy. So I'm in Portland, Oregon, on stolen land of the Atfalati and many others. I'm the director of Portland Hearing Voices, and I study psychology, not clinical psychology, not mental health. And the reason that I am a part of the HVN is because I occasionally have sensory grounded spiritual experiences, but one in particular altered the course of my life and changed my identity. When I was 17, I was at a party when a voice that I recognized to be the voice of God spoke to me. I say spoke, but it was definitely more of a somatic experience. It felt as though it had entered into my body and changed my perception. It also felt very angry, as though I was doing something wrong or I wasn't on the path that I should have been on. The shock and the terror of the experience made me fear that my heart would give out. At the same time, I became immediately aware of the human tendency to attack the gifted and the wounded. So I found a dark, quiet corner to hide in, and I tried to focus on regulating my breath and my heartbeat. By the morning, I was no longer afraid that the experience would kill me, and I just kind of attempted to go about my life. The voice continued to speak to me, but he was not angry or punitive anymore. The voice had become loving, and he taught me things. We formed kind of a teacher-student relationship. I would ask him questions about the nature of life, the universe, and reality. And he would use my life circumstances to answer my questions. The more able I was to set my preconceived beliefs aside in pursuit of the truth, the faster I learned. We did this for about 4 years, and I developed a very deeply loving relationship with him. And I never really told anybody. There weren't any people or situations that felt safe enough to reveal my experiences. And then it came time for him to leave. And honestly, I didn't know how to handle it. I did not know how to say goodbye to him. Our bond was so sort of continuous and deep. After he left, I kind of retreated into a fog of despair and forgetfulness. Over the next 7 years, I spent a lot of time coping and trying to heal. I knew from experience that clinical mental health environments were neither safe nor did they have anything of quality to offer me. So I began looking everywhere else. And it turns out that humans and all biological organisms, for that matter, are healing machines. There is literally an entire world of healing out there. Among healing practices, I found self-education to be one of the most effective and empowering. I learned a lot about the tremendous variety of human experiences and identities across the face of the world over the span of million years. And it caused me to become fascinated with humans, to appreciate my various experiences and identities, and also to be alert to some of humanity's bad habits. These are my favorite books. And I first encountered the HVN surfing the web in 2009. I saw a flyer that said, how can we live with and recover from extreme states of consciousness and madness? What do these experiences mean to you? Are there positive, creative, and spiritual sides to, extreme diagnoses? And when I saw the flyer, immediately a flood of memories came flooding back into my body of my voice, my beloved companion. And I was shocked and terrified again, but this time the fear was accompanied by a strengthening hope that I did not know was inside of me. I began to attend the group facilitated by Will Hall, but I was silent for months before sharing anything. I was too afraid. So when I finally did get the courage to start sharing and engaging with the group, it felt very much like my brain began to rapidly heal from all of the effects of years of hiding and living in fear. So now I'm going to go into the history. The Hearing Voices movement started in 1987 with Marius Rome and Patsy Hage. Marius and Patsy are from the Netherlands. Rome is a social psychiatrist and the son of a post-war politician. And people attribute that to his activist streak. He has a definite activist streak, and people think that might be why. He used to be a traditional psychiatrist, regarding voices as not real and the experiencers as being in need of drugs. Patsy started hearing voices when she was 8. The voices at first were friendly and they were her protectors. She heard about 20 of them, and she liked to talk to them on her way to school. But as she got older, the voices began to punish and torment her. And that's how she ended up in the hospital with Marius. So Patsy disagreed with Marius's contention that her experiences weren't real. She saw a crucifix in his office and asked if he believed in God. And he said, "Of course I do." So her response was, "Well, how can you believe in a God that you can't see or feel and then tell me that my experiences that the voices that I hear and the experiences that I have are not real?" So that's logic, right? He also noticed that he frequently had no idea what she was talking about, but when she got together with other voice hearers, they were able to understand each other. They also read The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind together. It was written by Yale psychologist Julian Jaynes. And he said that in ancient times, humans lacked consciousness as we know it today, and instead experienced thought as a series of auditory hallucinations. Hage found it reassuring that 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, her experiences would be considered normal. Although now we know through research that hearing voices and seeing visions is a completely normal human experience. He also believed that consciousness is not innate, but it's learned through language and culture. Together, they appeared on the Sonia Barron show in 1987. Patsy shared her experiences on the show, and then they asked voice hearers from the general population to phone in. Now, I just want to take a second to point out their body language. And I just want you to notice how he is deferring to her power, right? Like she, is clearly speaking from, her body, and he is deferring to her. And that's exactly what he should have been doing. So after she shared her experiences, they asked people from the general population who heard voices or had some sort of experience to phone in, and they got contacted by 450 people, 150 of whom said their voices did not bother them. So later that year, they held the first Hearing Voices Network Congress. 360 people attended, and among them were psychiatric patients, psychics, spiritual healers, and religious devotees who frequently heard the voice of God. From there began a growing body of groups, and they're in about 30 countries right now, I believe, and also research and later on the birth of Intervoice, which is the International Hearing Voices Committee. So now we'll go into Hearing Voices philosophy. And I'm going to jump around a little bit here, so don't get too confused, because I'm going to go in to 1 through 4 in more depth in just a minute. So Hearing Voices philosophy includes an ethos of accepting the voices and the experiences as being real. And that we know that hearing voices is a normal human experience now. Hearing voices groups are social, they are not clinical. People who attend hearing voices groups are the experts on themselves, and we work towards self-determination. Everybody in the group shares responsibilities for holding the values of the group. And we all have our own freedom of interpretation to challenge social norms and to speak about whatever we like. And then again, there are many ways to understand our experiences, not just one way. So now I'm going to go back up to 1, the definition of hearing voices. So we use the term hearing voices to describe a wide variety of experiences, which are often sensory oriented and not experienced by others, which in more developed countries are considered to be anomalous. Examples are hearing voices or other auditory phenomenon, seeing visions, spiritual or other types of possession, feeling things, visitations, receiving messages. And there are many, many ways to have these experiences. We use common everyday languages. Why language? Why is it important to use common everyday language? Language carries with it its cultures and subcultures, assumptions, and belief structures. It's imperative to the social health of the Hearing Voices Network to let go of these assumptions and beliefs to make space for the experiences of the voice hearers themselves, that is free from imposed definition. That was absolutely essential for me. I never could have waded through the myriad of experiences that were taking place inside me if I had people around me saying, this is this, and this is this, and this is this. It would have been terrible and I couldn't have done it. Connection to self-determination and free to interpret experiences in any way. So again, language is incredibly important when it comes to self-determination and interpretation. Yeah, so my experience was such that I hadn't had the opportunity to formulate a language to describe my experiences until I joined the HVN. And it was specifically because in those groups, we refrain from, using our own language to describe the experience of others, that I was able to do that. The Hearing Voices movement is an emancipatory movement, okay? So, and the definition of emancipation is the fact or process of being set free from legal, social, or political restrictions. It is a type of liberation. Psychology was founded in white colonialism, which still pervades its collective mentality. It corresponds with the belief that the cultural values of the colonizer are inherently superior to one's own. And so I closely relate emancipatory with decolonization. That's me. So decolonize means to free a people or area from colonial status, to relinquish control of a subjugated people or area, or to free from the dominating influence of a colonizing power. As a side note, I just like to point out that the DSM is used as a legal tool just as frequently as it is used as a medical tool. And if anybody wants to go into that more later on, I'd be happy to talk about it. But I believe that only after we decolonize psychology will we be able to have a real understanding of ourselves and our collective potential. The Hearing Voices movement is a social justice and human rights movement with a long and broad history, first arising in the 1960s civil rights movement, the psychiatric survivor movement, and protest by critical psychologists of the oppressive and sometimes brutal nature of much of mental health care, according to the New Statesman. The continuous iatrogenic harm caused by the mental health industry necessitates safe spaces, action, and solidarity on our part. So for anybody who's not familiar with the term iatrogenic is a condition, it's a state of ill health or adverse effect caused by mental treatment. Some definitions include the word inadvertent, but I think in this case, it's not necessarily appropriate to use that word because it continues to happen despite consistent feedback throughout history. And then I would also like to point out the concept of restorative justice. Restorative justice seeks to examine the harmful impact of a crime and then determines what can be done to repair that harm while holding the person, or group of people or industry who caused it accountable for their actions. Accountability for the offender means accepting responsibility and acting to repair the harm done. In a way, restorative justice is very much about rehabilitating the offender. And I think I'm going to finish up with showing you a little bit of showing you a trailer for the documentary Crazy Wise. This is a documentary by human rights photographer and filmmaker Phil Borges. He spent 25 years documenting indigenous cultures and noticed that experiences that Westerners would consider psychotic were instead frequently seen as indications of shamanic potential. Through interviews, he explores the growing mental health crisis in the US, dominated by biomedical psychiatry, along with the realization that we need to explore alternatives that offer recovery, connection, and meaning.
I experience screaming voices. People don't believe how insane I am.
And it was terrifying, totally manic or totally depressed. And it wasn't him. Adam we knew.
I just wanted a car to hit me or a truck or just something to take me out because this time I wanted to really work.
I really felt like I needed to end my life. I felt like I was this complete failure. So I was in really bad shape, and the mental health system only made that worse.
It's a mythology to think that there's the normal and then there's the abnormal.
The average recovery rate in the Western world, with all our sophisticated diagnoses and medications and highly paid experts, is about 1/3. The recovery rate in the developing world is about 2/3.
Where does somebody who's in this delicate state, they're in a process. They're sent to prison, they're sent to jail, they're sent to a psychiatric ward, or they're chemically incarcerated, or they're homeless.
In the United States, we've come to believe in the chemical imbalance theory of mental disorder.
These medicines are very, very powerful in helping, but they can be very powerful in harming.
I mean, like the disclaimer on these pills, that's typically the first side effect is suicidal thoughts. And that's what the doctor is giving you to feel better. I mean, it's crazy.
We live in a psychotic society. We do. And what is meant by psychotic? Out of touch with reality.
How mental illness is constructed in different places in the world is very, very different.
Only in the Western world have we developed this bizarre idea that hearing voices and having strange ideas has no meaning at all.
My human rights work has taken me to indigenous and tribal cultures around the world. Often I met individuals who would go into a trance-like state to serve as a healer or visionary for their community. These are the people we call shaman. And I was surprised to learn that many were identified in their youth by having what we would call a psychotic break. Hearing voices, having visions, feeling terrified. I was struck by how differently these symptoms were looked at in our culture.
We have lost touch in our medical system from some of the simple needs that people have for connection, the simple needs that people have for community. Maybe it's not just a broken brain. Maybe it's not just an illness. Maybe this is not just something to hide and be ashamed of. Maybe it's something to explore and learn from.
Thank you, everybody. I will stop sharing my screen now.
All right, thank you. Next we have Cozy.
Wow, Kate, what a wonderful presentation. Thank you for that. And thank you for letting folks know about the history, which is a really important piece. And hello, everyone. I am Kenneth Cozy Arrington. I am in Oakland, California, and I am going to tell you a little bit about myself while sharing a PowerPoint, as you will see, a bit about my perspective and what it has been like to be me as a voice hearer and extraordinary experiencer. I'm going to begin now to share my screen, and hopefully we get this going. Well, you know what, since this, let's see.
I hear voices that other people don't. One of them is friendly. You look great. But the others say scary things that can leave me feeling miserable. You're worthless. They're coming for you. It makes me want to be by myself. Many people who hear nasty voices feel isolated. It's such a common issue that researchers at the University of Oxford are trying to learn more about it. They've discovered that many voice hearers want to be around other people, but find it difficult for many reasons.
My voices tell me I can't trust anyone, so I feel safer on my own. I don't want to talk to my family and friends about it in case it scares them.
I don't want to be judged.
If you haven't experienced it yourself, it's impossible to understand what it's like. It's hard to concentrate on what people are saying when the voices are talking too.
If I feel scared around other people, the voices get worse. And if the voices don't like what I say, they torment me later.
It's exhausting. It's confusing.
It's just easier to be alone. But being isolated isn't a long-term solution and can make the voices worse. Over time, a number of voice hearers in the study learnt that there are benefits to being around people. On that journey, they figured out what works best for them.
I found it helpful to talk to other voice hearers. I can talk freely and not worry they'll judge me or get upset.
With practice, it's easier to tune into conversations and tune out my voices.
And I'm slowly learning to trust people again.
I've accepted that the voices are part of my life. I don't need to feel ashamed.
And I've found my own way of telling people that I'm having difficulties. Most of the people I've told have been understanding.
My good friends and family have shown they are there for me when I'm ready. There will be good days and bad days. And that's okay.
Yes. So let's see. Let's escape from there. Let me figure out how to navigate my way back into the room. And I'm having difficulty finding my way back. Let's see. Oh no, not again. Stop. Stop. Okay.
Hi, Cozy. If you hit stop share, that should bring you back.
Okay, I'll hit stop there. Yeah, that brought me back. Well, folks, the modern technology, the technology difficulties, because that video was actually supposed to play later on in my presentation. I'm going to try and share my screen now and share my PowerPoint. All right. Let's go here. Share, start from here. And go slideshow from the beginning. I'm going to swap my screen. There, folks, can you see that now? Is that better? So, do you hear what I hear? Let me ask you, when you heard this title, do you hear what I hear? Did any of you think about that Christmas song, Do You Hear What I Hear? Well, when I came up with this title, that's exactly what I thought of, but I thought it was a really good gimmick, something to catch your attention, and it appears as though you have. So thank you for listening to yourselves and being here and allowing us to present to you today. Okay. All right, so in my presentation today, I'll tell you a little bit about my personal story. After that, I will talk a little bit about some of the causation theories and the phases of hearing voices while presenting slides. At the end, hopefully I'll have time to summarize. What I do encourage you all to do is to please use the chat box to ask any questions you may have for me, to make any comments, and to answer any questions I may ask of you during my presentation. And please remember, folks, it's really important to exercise self-care. Do whatever it is you need to do to take care of yourselves always. So I am Kenneth Cozy Arrington. I am 68 years old. You can see that I am an African-American male. My pronouns are he, him, his. I was born in San Francisco, where I began to attend parochial school after kindergarten. Right now, if you look up into the right corner of your screen, you will see the PEERS logo. PEERS stands for Peers Envisioning and Engaging in Recovery Services, which is a local nonprofit organization in Alameda County. Our charge at PEERS is to eliminate the prejudice, the stigma, and the discrimination that people with mental health challenges have to live and deal with on a daily basis. And we do that by offering a number of self-empowering groups, workshops, and activities, all of which are free. And now that I've said that, I'm going to tell you now about me as an extraordinary experiencer. As a young child, I began to hear voices. I saw things that others people did not see. What really freaked parents and professionals out was that I had knowledge of things that I, as a child, could possibly have no knowledge of, which led me to believe that perhaps I had been here before in other shapes, forms. I had paranormal experiences, extrasensory perception, and clairvoyance. And this is all very frightening for a child, especially once that child is told that this is not right or this is unusual. So the voices that I began to hear in the Catholic school or in the Catholic church, was it God? Was it the devil? Because that's what they taught, good and bad, good and evil, you know. Some of the voices were kind, which later they turned unkind. They became menacing. They became humiliating and debasing. They were always making dire predictions. They were hateful and harmful. And some of them to this day still are. And all of this, of course, led to symptoms and behaviors. I was really stressed out kid growing up. I had physical manifestations of my body of where I would just pick at myself until I bled because I had no way of letting all of what I was feeling out, and I really had no way of articulating it or telling anybody about it. So it led to a great deal of anxiety, great deal of isolation, depression, confusion, suicidal thoughts, insomnia, paranoia, and fear, a lot of which of these symptoms I still experience today as a senior citizen. Here is where that video was supposed to be played, but we've already seen the video. So let's talk about what causes hearing voices. I'm sure that in this room, this virtual room, there are maybe psychiatrists, psychologists, physicians, clinicians, therapists. There may be, of course, the impacted community, other folks like myself who have these types of experiences. There may be folks from law enforcement. There may be a lot of different folks, family members, loved ones. So that's why I want to address this to all and everyone who's in the room. Hopefully this presentation will be all inclusive. So the phenomenon of hearing voices inside the head, which others cannot, can be categorized as a common form of auditory hallucination. Hallucination is the perception or sensation of sounds, noises, or voices that can be heard by a person when they are awake and gives the feeling of being real. These illusions are created by the brain. People with auditory hallucinations sometimes hear sounds they are familiar with, and sometimes they hear unusual noises. The sound or sounds, noise or noises, voice or voices a person hears may be frightening or pleasant. If any of this resonates with you, please put something in the chat. Let us know, let me know that you are understanding or what your questions might be. So that is a brief definition and not the only definition of what causes hearing voices. And here are some common causation theories. And once again, in the chat, let me know if any of these resonate with you or your loved one or a client of yours or a patient perhaps. So brain damage or injury is a common cause of the onset of hearing voices. Being bullied. Oftentimes I hear people say that they hear the voice of the person who bullied them. Or beat them up or did all manner of unkind things to them. The death of a loved one is a catalyst for some people to begin to see the person who is no longer with us, to hear them, to feel them, to smell them, all of these things. Drugs, we're talking about street drugs as well as prescription drugs can cause one to hear voices. Of course, trauma is the number one reason that folks experience voice hearing. Trauma is at the base, usually, of all of these events. Usually, a person can remember when their voices started and the traumatic event that preceded that onset. Extreme isolation or isolation in general. I speak to isolation. My parents were born on the East Coast. I was born in San Francisco. So I grew up not knowing what it was like to have a grandmother, a grandfather, aunt, uncle, niece, cousin, any type of family other than my mother and my father and my brother. So I felt really isolated, not even knowing what it was then. And I began to, imagine things on my own, you know, how children have their imaginary friends. Well, mine became a lot more than that. And I do think that a lot of it was because I was living in isolation. Mental illness is another common causation theory, as well as physical illness, dream states. Some folks hear voices in right before they're going to sleep or when they're waking up. That's not unusual. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, these types of, once again, trauma can be catalysts for the onset of hearing voices. Sleep deprivation, well, that speaks for itself. Spiritual experiences, such as Kate has already spoken about. Starvation, I can imagine how someone who is starving can begin to hallucinate all types of things. And of course, stress. So I ask you now, if you can think of any other reasons why a person might hear voices, why you may have begun to hear voices, or why you hear voices, to please share that with us in the chat. So what causes hearing voices? Well, these that I've just mentioned or shared in the PowerPoint are some of the most common causation theories related to special messages, which is what we call it on my job. This does not mean that they are the only sources. So if you believe that your messages or experiences stem from a different source, please let us know, once again, by putting it in the chat. Everybody's experience is valid and personal. And we are all as unique as are the voices we hear and their sources, as well as other extraordinary events. Take a look at this visual, folks. Can you identify with any of these images? Do any of these images remind you of either yourself or a loved one, a colleague, a neighbor, someone you may know? Do you know anyone who hears voices, who may see things? Is it you? Do you feel things? Do you smell things? Do you find yourself talking to that which no one else can see, hear, or imagine? So I put this here so that I'm pretty sure that everyone can identify with at least one of these images, if not all of that, right? I'm going to move on now to talk about the 3 phases of hearing voices. The first phase being the startling phase. Can you remember the startling phase? For those of you in the audience who are like myself and who are voice hearers, during that startling phase, many voice hearers are not able to talk about their voices, and they are overwhelmed by the experience. I know I was. The startling phase is named this because of the hearer's discovery of the voices often startles them and causes them to deny the experience and withdraw into themselves. This leads to a sense of isolation and a fear of madness itself. Most voice hearers describe the onset of the experience as being quite sudden, startling, and anxiety-provoking. And they can vividly remember the precise moment they first heard a voice. Look at that poor character over there on the right. Yes, I can imagine what that must be like because I have been there. If you can identify or know what this is like, a startling phase, if you can remember what your experience was like, and if you would care to share even a little bit about it, please do put it in the chat. If nothing more, to acknowledge that, yes, I know what it's like and I've been there. The second phase, wow, okay, my girl, this is the second phase, which is the coping phase. Forget that it says 3 phases of hearing voices up there. So during the organization or coping phase, the second phase, voice hearers want to break free from the anxiety and confusion caused by the voices. To come to terms with the voices or to successfully organize them requires some form of acceptance to take place. Acceptance to take place. Denying the voices does not work. In this phase, people seek to find some meaningful and understanding and to cope with and control their voice hearing experience. Some helpful strategies include ignoring the voices by using distraction methods. That's not the same as denying the voices altogether. Ignoring the voices and using distraction methods. Some of us will listen to them selectively. We're able to, others are not. Some of us enter into willing dialogue with them. Others are not able to do that. Some of us are able to make specific appointments with them. You know, not now, not now. I have to work, I have to drive, I have to function. I can deal with you later. Okay, come back later. Some of us are able to do that. Many, many others are not. So attempts at distraction and ignoring the voices sometimes work. And although this is a strategy many voice hearers attempt, it seems sometimes that the effort involved can often lead to a more severe restriction of one's lifestyle. That takes us to the third stage of hearing voices, which is actually the stabilization phase. Once the existence of the voices becomes accepted, some voice hearers are able to move on to make the voices part of their everyday life. I have been able to do that, fortunately. In the stabilization phase and with help, a more balanced relationship with the voices is built up. Some people can do and learn to cope, can and do learn to cope with their voices and find an equilibrium. And in some cases, voice hearers can even discover that the voices are capable of a positive influence. My voices sometimes are kind to me and other times not so kind. My voices allow me to be overly creative, and they can allow me to withdraw into the point where I just want to crawl under the table and hide. So during the stabilization phase, an individual may be able to choose between following the advice of the voices or to follow their own thoughts and ideas. And they may be able to say, I hear voices and I'm okay about it. I can cope. Or I hear voices and I am not okay. I just can't cope with it. It's the truth. So if any of you can identify with either of these three phases, the startling phase, the stabilization phase, or the coping phase, let us know about it in the chat, okay? Well, I am a co-facilitator of a weekly Hearing Voices Network group for the here in the Bay Area. And in our groups, I'm so glad that Kate has, in her presentation, stated what the groups are about and what Hearing Voices Network is about. So in our groups, we accept that voices and visions are very real experiences, especially for us. We accept that people are not any less for having voices and visions. In our groups, we respect each member as the expert on themselves, and we do encourage an ethos of self-determination. We value ordinary, non-professionalized language, and we are free to interpret experiences in any way. In our groups, we are free to challenge social norms, and we sanction the freedom to talk about anything and not just voices and visions. So that brings me, I believe, to the end of my presentation. And I ask you once again, do you someone you know, someone you love. Do you hear what I hear? Do you hear what they hear? I am Kenneth Cozy Arrington, folks. Thank you for allowing me to be with you today and to share. And now I would like to pass the baton, if you will, to Tom Clute, who is our next speaker. Tom?
Can you see me yet? There we go. Thank you, Cozy.
You're welcome.
Get this look. All right. So
Okay, Tom, I have your presentation up. If you just want to say next slide when you want me to advance it, I can do that for you.
okay, thank you. Well, welcome. I'm so grateful to be a part of this webinar, and I'm really excited to be with this group. They're going places, and I'm really healing and grateful to have this chance to stretch and share. We've got the first slide up here, and I wanted to introduce emergence medicine and also the theme of soulfulness. And then I'll weave my story through this. But that phrase, emergence medicine, felt aligned for me as a unity, integral, coherent process, coherent way of moving from duality to unity. That's been part of my experience. And then also surrender, to surrender my chaotic life and my misunderstanding and just plain being a humble and sometimes very arrogant human. It's been a learning journey. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. All right, so a little bit about me. I am an empowerment coach, and the most energy that has gone into my empowerment coaching is myself, and now I'm learning to branch out, for example, this webinar. So I'm an empowerment coach who holds the intention of blessing others to see, experience, and live out their highest vision. And I wanted to comment on the highest vision, that I feel that just like the rainbow, there's a spectrum, just like the light from the sun, several different spectrums. And so there's no judgment on vision where you are. In fact, I've learned that I need self-acceptance in order to heal and settle into an evolving, not just vision, but way of life. And I feel this community here, the National Empowerment Center, does that, and I'm really grateful. Also, pursuing and providing personal excellence of being worthy, capable of loving and caring for ourselves unconditionally. That has been an extraordinary journey, and it continues to be an extraordinary journey. And part of it is to practice mindfulness, to slow down my brain and breathe. And then also a prayer to my heart, to the spiritual realms that I understand, and have that, as Cozy has said, sometimes we can enter a dialogue with the different aspects of ourselves. Next slide, please. All right, so we want to talk a little bit about Western medicine and emergency medicine. Now, there's an author by Martin Buber that he has this book called, well, I don't know what the book is called, but he includes I, thou. And so I, thou is kind of like the namaste way, is the beauty or the light I see in you. It's an acknowledgement of sacredness, and that's really, just pause for a second on this. I just got to say that in my experience, I have gone through a lot of hospitals from my 30s and to this last year, and they've been dominant culture, Western medicine, psychiatric based. And for me, it's an incomplete model, because we need to not rest on our laurels, which I'm not saying we do, but there's certainly the big pharma that there was no argument, there was no information, there was no education on choice from the caregivers and providers that I went through, including the VA. So I'm learning also to not, I don't know why the word comes up, but to not demonize or make it catastrophic for the emergence of the dominant culture, adding chiropractic. This is my experience, adding chiropractic and acupuncture and other healing modalities. So, and that's all I knew for such a long time. And so with encouragement and new friends like Kate and so on, that's been very healing for my journey. So let's talk a little bit about the and how are we doing for time so far?
We're good. Go for it, Tom. You're on a roll. Just, yeah, don't worry about time.
Okay. So Western medicine and emergence medicine, for some reason, the medical model, the Western model, we were talking about Martin Buber, the I-IT model, that's very different. With the I-IT model, the person gets blamed for their condition by the medical system based on diagnosis and pathology orientation, including a history of violence, domination, and patriarchy. Now, that's not just the medical system, that's our entire global think, our collective consciousness. There's a dominance, the dominant is there, and as Kate was saying, it's not the only one there. She went out and researched, and I've had to do that too, and it has been very challenging, especially the feeling of being alone, nobody understanding, and trying to get solutions out of a model that is an incomplete model. I think that's the most respectful way to describe a disrespectful stance in medicine, because they do not acknowledge consciousness. This is my experience: consciousness, soulfulness, spirituality. For some reason, we get our science into a linear rather than a cornucopia or a symphony of options. If we can only learn to trust ourselves, to get to know ourselves better, and I will continue here. So the Western medicine also, the philosophy and practice does not acknowledge a living universe. So I think you can probably feel some of my angst from acknowledging these things, and that's my peacemaking journey, and this webinar is also a part of sharing peace and knowledge and understanding. So we also said separation and illness-based models. For example, in the VA, I was able to retitle my experience to name it as moving from illness management to wellness lifestyle. So I ended up having to coin my own vocabulary to change my experience. And I think that's an invitation for all of us to take ownership of our vocabulary and learn from our tribes, for example, the HVN, Hearing Voices Network, so that we can start to feel acceptance and learn to listen to ourselves by listening to others. So I attended the Hearing Voices facilitator training with Kate and Haya back in 2012. And from there, I've taken sound healing, sacred gong sound healing, meditation, and quite a few different things that I've learned along the way. Let's continue this slide here. So I was sharing to not twist, but shaping and influencing, taking ownership, and that's all part of self-determination. So devoid of spirituality, that's been my experience. It may not be others, but it has been mine. And also a nomenclature of control and power over an authoritarian stance, and big pharma choosing from a wholeness context and model. Okay, let me just go down just a little bit more here. Okay, that's it. Oh, here we go. Also, now we're into the slide. We continue the slide, open systems versus closed systems. So I shared in my experience of dominant Western culture, which would be a closed system or a silo, very controlled and so on. But the happy news is that there's so much more available to us if we have the courage to persist and to be encouraged and research and do what the best we can. And that's wonderful. How are we doing for time? Let's see. Okay, there we go. Open systems versus closed systems. Do that a little bit larger. There we go. Okay, so an open system is like a celebration, fresh air, nature, intuition, self-respect, and the I and thou model. So the intentional peer support model, language and practices by Sherry Mead, which myself and many others have taken, including Kate here. So that intentional peer support, it has its basis in the dialogue process. And for me, dialogue has become a life passion for the last 10 years. And I'm now moving into public service, not just private service anymore. And that's been a huge leap. And I've had to ask for a lot of help to get the courage by doing it and practicing. And now we're doing it. So you can do that too. Just say, hey, can I serve? How can I serve? What do you suggest I do? How do I find my gifts? All right. So back to the slide. We've just talked about Sherry Mead and intentional peer support having a dialogue basis, and that opens up our language capacities, and we can invent the words that we want. Like, for example, I invented an alternative for cell, C-E-L-L, and self, S-E-L-F. So I hybrid as C-E-L-F. So that gives me more options. All right, cooperative and horizontal power with frameworks. This is an organic way of participation, active participation and organic, and it reduces a tremendous amount of hierarchy and external control. Continue this here. Also, the open system is mission driven, not hierarchy or authoritarian. And the open system also makes space, open systems make space to approach our experiences from a wholeness perspective. As I shared before, integral, unified, organic, coherent, informed pedagogy. Maria Montessori revolutionized childcare, as Piaget also studied children. That was in psychology, I learned that. All right, next slide, please. I am positing here a definition to offer an open system of emergence medicine, and it is an intentional engagement with one's whole being and their environment that nurtures, supports, and strengthens self-determination and consciousness. It is synergistic and participatory. And coming together and sharing these ways of being and having this open model, it invites curiosity, it invites exploration, and it invites community. So we're no longer isolated or separated. I want to read that definition one more time because there's a lot of information there. An open system is an intentional engagement. Look at the word intentional there, and engagement. Those are very active words. An intentional engagement with one's whole being, which I think the Hearing Voices Network is exploring that. And as Cozy was saying, that it's not just hearing voices, it's the whole being. That means nothing is judged or thrown out or embarrassed. It's a very amazing experience. And it has been an amazing experience for me, and I'm grateful to continue sharing this here. So an intentional engagement with one's whole being and their environment. An environment is a holistic, inclusive. That's a very, very deep conversation and field of study. The environment in social work, they talk about goodness of fit theory, which is a cybernetics theory, which basically means that systems and structures and pathways are natural occurrences in nature and in life. All right, so it nurtures, supports, and strengthens self-determination and consciousness. It is synergistic and participatory. So I'd love to get this emergence medicine definition on the notes so that you can review that, but I hope that helps. Next slide, please. All right.
By the way, they will be getting the slides, so that's not a problem. So maybe like 8 minutes, and then we can do some interaction. Tom, does that sound good?
Sure, that sounds fine. Thank you. Spirituality, to me, from a personal and research perspective, is a proactive and sometimes challenging or exhilarating voyage in which I face life head on. Now, I will admit, as a human, I don't always face life head on. Sometimes I sleep way too much. Sometimes I overeat. And sometimes I take a healthy drive in nature. I've taken drives through New Mexico, Colorado, and a whole bunch of states the last couple of years. And I just had, this is an example for me of hearing voices, is that I felt an internal somatic urge and nudging, like a real powerful nudging. There was no word, there was just a deep feeling that I needed to move on and take a trip. And I took several trips, went also into Mount St. Helens, Mount Hood, and Mount Shasta, and also Taos, New Mexico. One of my spiritual teachers, Stuart Wilde, had his trainings there. So spirituality and connection, connecting with ourselves and our environment. The environment is underestimated, especially intentional environment. So we talk about connection versus separation, and through mutual aid. Now, Alex Gitterman, I'm going to share the book title. Alex Gitterman of Columbia University wrote a book called Mutual Aid and the Life Cycle. So that's a paradigm, a model that works. Whenever we go from, and I love what Kate shared about being colonized. We don't even know it. So that's, I feel like the Western medicine is a colonized, there's a separation of power, and that they wield the drugs and think that they're doing a good job. And I've got to say, from my experience, that after 25 years of taking drugs that the VA recommended, I got curious. I also got very tired, and I began to question the system. And one of the physicians, the prescribers, was forthright, respectful, and plain talk. She said, "Tom, I'm not a researcher, I'm a clinician." So what I interpreted from that was she was saying, this is my role, this is my job, and this is what you can expect from me. Anything other than what I'm authorized to serve you is on you, and you're welcome to go do it. She didn't say that, but she just made that clear distinction that she had her role and she has her role, and I have my, and here's another aspect that wants to emerge to myself is we're called upon self-determination. We're called upon personal responsibility when we lean into self-determination, and yet it's a collective experience also, the hearing voices. So it's quite a symphony. When I'm connected, I'm in an environment where I can experience value, nourishment, and opportunity to live my highest vision. Spirituality holds a context and space for aliveness, responsibility, and a challenging yet rewarding path of self-discovery. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I think we're complete. So go ahead, Oryx.
All right. If all the presenters could come back on their videos, that would be great. And I just want to thank Tom, Cozy, and Kate for an amazing presentation. We're getting a lot of great feedback in the chat, which is nice. And you have been sharing some questions, and I am going to try to take a look at those questions. We're trying a new way to do that, so just bear with me for a second. Shira, could you help? Because I am not finding that shared drive screen that I had up. Maybe I accidentally closed it. Do you have, are there some questions that have come in, Shira?
Yeah, I can go ahead and just message them to you if that works.
Or you could even jump on if you want. Shira Collins, everyone. She's amazing.
Sure, I'll jump on. Hi, everybody. I can add a spotlight so people can see. Thank you so much for that presentation, everyone. By the way, that was just phenomenal. I learned so much. So we have a question for Cozy. I'm curious why you chose that picture to go with the first slide. Can you tell us why? It looks scary. Are there happy paintings or pictures of people hearing voices?
Yes, I'm sure that just as there are as many people that hear voices, there are as many images that might accompany how they might present or how they might feel. Because the slide is called the startling phase, I chose that picture because it shows someone who absolutely looks startled and scared, which was part of the description of that phase. So hopefully that answers your question. Next, yes, thank you for the question. Good question.
I want to add too, it is a really good question, that what a lot of the research says, and so a lot of that work was done by Marius Rome and his wife Sandra Escher over years, is that actually 2/3 of people who hear voices never encounter the mental health system. So that startling phase may not be so startling to them, because a lot of the times it may be the voice, let's say, of someone they loved, a deceased spouse or a deceased family member, and they hear that voice, and it's actually very comforting. So yeah, that's important to keep in mind, that actually 2/3 of people who hear voices, they don't encounter the mental health system. So that means they're probably hearing more positive voices, or they're able to deal with the voices without seeking help. So yeah, I thought I'd say that.
Thank you. We have another question, and this one is for Kate. I would love to hear more about Kate's comments on the DSM as a legal tool.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it's used as a legal tool to use against people, criminalize people, prove, certain points. It's used as, frankly, it's used as a tool of oppression within the legal system, just as much as it's used to, kind of give people diagnoses.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add to that? Okay. Well, we do have another question for Cozy. Do you have any thoughts on how the voices were able to tell you things otherwise that you would have not known as a child?
Well, as a child, for me to be able to describe people, places, and things, far off countries or far off lands, when I'm 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, that was mind-boggling to my parents and to any professionals that they took me to. And it scared them so much that they wanted to study me. And at that point, my parents backed up and said, no, you will not be doing any type of experiments on my child. I'll tell you very briefly about a very interesting vision that I had and words that were spoken to me. Do you remember me saying that my parents are from the East Coast? But I was born in San Francisco. I didn't know what it was like. I'd never met any of my relatives, any of that. Well, one night I had a visitation, what would be called a visitation. I woke up and there was this woman sitting at the foot of my bed. I'm not sure what time of night it was or early morning, but certainly I had been asleep. And I woke up and I didn't feel frightened or afraid for some reason. I don't know why, but she began to talk to me. And she said some very specific things. And then it seemed like it was over. Well, I woke up my parents after this incident. And they were like, oh boy, go back to bed. You're having a nightmare. And I was like, no, mommy, but the lady said, and I said whatever that was. And both my parents sat straight up in the bed. And I was able to describe a woman, my grandmother, whom I had never seen or met, and say these things. And then my parents, they gave each other that incredulous look like, what is going on here? And even in that reaction, as a 5 or 6, 7-year-old, I knew from that reaction of my parents that this was not something that was normal or expected, even though I didn't know what normal was. So can you imagine how mind-boggling that was? So that was the first of many paranormal, psychic types of experience as a kid. And then being raised in that Catholic church, I must say, it really did a number on me. To see this dude up on the cross with nails in his hands and feet, to see all the statues around, I began to hear all those voices and experience all of those things somehow through osmosis. I don't know how, but yeah, it was very real and tangible to me as a kid. So hopefully that answers your question, whoever the person was that asked. And thank you for asking that question.
Thank you for sharing that story. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. That's so powerful. We have another great question. Do any of you have suggestions on how we can integrate the message of normalcy of hearing voices into the culture or general mainstream community?
I could start. um, for those of you who know me, you know I'm into film and media, and I think that's the most powerful way we can do it right now. That's the way that reaches the most amount of people. So, for example, the movie Crazy Wise that Kate showed you a little trailer for, and I produced a movie called Healing Voices, which has been seen by over 1 million people now, and it's on Amazon Prime. So I think media is a huge way to be able to do that. I don't think the mental health system is going to decide all of a sudden to change and to start promoting these messages in the mainstream. So we have to be the media, and we have to get the word out. That could be also social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff. So those are a few thoughts.
I'd like to pipe up for a second. Oh, were you going to say something, Kate?
I can go after you.
Okay. So I think about the environment to answer that question, being conscious and intentional with our environment, including the HVN communities worldwide and the area that you're in, more than likely, but at least online for sure. But again, being proactive with your choices of who you surround yourself with. And that's what I had to share. Go ahead, Kate.
Well, I think a lot can be done in everyday conversations with just the people that you're around. The general, like the view of the general population has the ability to change so much faster than a huge system that has like all of its cogs already in place and relies on all of those cogs in order to keep going. But if you have just regular conversations with the people that you're around, you know, toss some fun facts out there. By the way, did you know that 1 in 12 kids hears voices? Did you know that, you know, a lot of people are perfectly fine with it? You know, like you can just kind of toss out all of these, you know, bits of information that are counter to what a lot of people, you know, believe to be true. And that can be kind of a fun conversation piece without, you know, necessarily revealing anything, you know, too personal if you're worried about that. There's just like a ton of information that you can just like kind of toss out there.
Cozy, I know you have your hand raised.
Cozy, yes.
Yes, the most important part of the story that I told was, even as I was telling this to my parents, the phone rang. It was a phone call from the East Coast informing my mother that her mother had passed. So do you see now? Yes.
Wow.
Thank you so much.
I watched a.
Oh, go ahead, Tom.
Thank you. I watched a video by National Geographic on the Great Migration, and it shares about how little us humans know about the cycle of life and voyages and so on, that all animals have this invisible magnetism, is magnetic, that they know what to do. The school of fish, whale, porpoise, they all have their cycles, and the rhythms are just absolutely breathtakingly on point. So I feel that we're that way also. We have the potential, and yet there's a lot of training out there now about the heart-mind connection and the heart having its own intelligence. And to me, it's a mystery, and it's so worthy of exploration. And we can also release what no longer works for us in that process.
Thank you. That's beautiful, Tom.
Thank you.
Do we have time for one more question?
Yes.
Okay. This one asks, what are the top 2 to 3 best practices for peer support workers to better support a voice hearer? Using respect and non-judging, which questions can we ask and which should we avoid?
Well, I'd like to plug one. If the question is thrown out, if you throw me that fastball or that slow pitch, I'll hit it. So I would recommend, I highly recommend emotional CPR. I highly recommend the Hearing Voices facilitation training. Yes, that's what this webinar is about. But to address your question, I highly recommend intentional peer support, but I also highly recommend emotional CPR as a way to have a real heart-to-heart connection where nobody's the fixer, no one's the person, who has no hope. It's two people engaged in a situation, mutual support. So emotional CPR is one that I would recommend. I'm curious to hear from others.
I'll go. So one of the first things that I would try, I think is best is to remember that hearing voices and seeing visions is totally normal. And I think, when I was afraid to tell other people about my experience, I did not know how normal it was. And so that might be something that you would want to mention first and foremost, is lots of people have that experience. I'll also maybe I would try to be sensitive about whether the person wants to go deeper into it or whether they just wanted to say that, and just say, do you want to tell me more, or did you just want to toss it out there? And it can be helpful, to just talk about what the experience, feels like. Yeah.
Yeah, it's important not to be dismissive, not to be critical, not to tell the person, oh, you're crazy. Oh my God, can you imagine what that must do? It's like kicking a dog when it's already down. To hopefully be able to validate and be able to clearly say, I don't understand what you're going through, but I do believe that what you are experiencing is real to you. Can you say more about it so I can get a better understanding? But the other negative stuff that people say and do, making you the butt of jokes and ridicule you and talk trash about you on social media, which is a huge thing these days. That is so devastating and detrimental to anyone, even under the best of circumstances.
Right. And I also wanted to add that some of these ways of connecting with each other can also be used with the voices or the experience themselves. So just as we want to be compassionate and understanding with each other, we want to be compassionate and understanding with the voices, whatever experience someone is having. So we can actually, for example, practice emotional CPR with our voices. So rather than, and this is one way of doing it, because sometimes it just helps to talk back to your voices. But it can also help to be compassionate with your voices and understand that the voice may be coming from a difficult place, and that that voice probably has a backstory and has a reason for behaving the way that it does if it's a negative voice. And so many people have improved their relationship with their voices by improving their communication and being more compassionate with their voices. So we often talk about improving your relationship with your experience. So I wanted to throw that out there as a possibility. And at this point, I think we have to wrap up just to respect people's time. Really want to thank Cozy, Kate, and Tom, and thank you, Shira, for stepping in. sometimes you try new things and it needs a little tweak. But I appreciate you stepping up. We're a team here. And for everybody who came on today, you were a big part of this. Really great questions and participation in the chat. I see a lot of people that I know who joined the webinar. We appreciate it. And please stay in touch, and we will definitely be letting you know about future webinars. This webinar again was recorded, so it'll be available on our website, power2u.org. And you can also email us and let us know if you'd like a certificate of attendance. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Peace and blessings, everyone. Love more, judge less.